what I'm going to talk to you about is the case studies that Pat referred to that Tina and I worked on in NALA. You should all have seen these. These were published in February and launched at the Tutors Forum. And they're called What Really Counts. Encourage you to have a read of these. There are 5 case studies which look in depth at 5 practitioners' practice, very much focused on their teaching strategies, not just focused on the topics, for instance, how we teach percentages or how we teach measuring, but also looking at those general teaching strategies, such as how we use problem solving, such as Pat and Elizabeth talked about just now, how we use context in a meaningful way with our learners, how we use questioning in a way that encourages learning and encourages learners to question themselves and to question us. So here's what we're finding. The findings seem to fall, to my mind so far, and as I say, we're still analysing them, into 4 main areas. People seem to be looking at focusing on ways of teaching topics. So what is a good way of teaching fractions? What is a good way of teaching place value? What worked for my learners this time? The kinds of things that we can pass on to other tutors and say, this worked here, you might want to try this. Apps galore. Lots and lots and lots of information about apps that have been used on iPads. So we look forward to cataloguing that kind of idea and saying, right, these are the topics, these are some apps. These ones, bear in mind that they're probably designed for children. Lots of bright colours and noises, but that's fine if it's family learning. These ones are very good for using with adults. There's then ways of approaching topics. How to think about a topic. Would you teach algebra at the end of the course because you want to leave it, because everyone's scared of it, including you as the tutor? Or do we build it in right from the beginning? These are some of the ideas that were coming out there. Understandings about how we work as practitioners, how we learn ourselves and how we tutor. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes here that have come out of the reports that I spotted while I was reading them earlier this week. Here's the first one. I really enjoyed the activity involved in the exercise. This is the exercise that the tutor used with her learners. And this reinforced to me that I'm a fan of both physical movement in the classroom and active learning, where learners have to make decisions about the material. And this is echoing what Elizabeth was talking about earlier. Listening back to the group discussion, I think that I tend to over-explain at times and to jump in with answers without giving the learners time to think through their ideas. And I should have said this tutor actually asked her learners to give her feedback and recorded it with their permission. That's a brave tutor who would record and listen back. And another comment that we had, I believe that being part of the project has improved my method of tutoring. As I said earlier, maths is not one of my core subjects, so this made me feel much more comfortable in delivering the module. I think that's interesting. And then there are understandings about learners and about the whole learning process that were coming through here as well. And really homing in on the assumptions that we make as tutors about what our learners already know or already don't know. I thought this was a great example of algebra using pockets. So I'm going to read it to you just so that you get an idea of some of the really creative stuff that's coming out. I would like to try to use more practical algebra examples, the tutor wrote, especially as I think it's an area that learners find it hard to relate to. Another example I came up with was the pocket example. I filled my pockets with pens, coins, and keys. Then I took them out one by one and asked learners what each one was. Next, I held up, for example, a pen and asked, what do I have here? 1 pen and 1 pen. Can these be added together? Yes, we have 2 pens. Next, held up a coin and a key and asked, what do I have now? They said a coin and a key. I said, can these be added together in any way? No. This is a very simple idea, but I found it worked really well for introducing like and unlike terms, and the idea that like terms can be added together while unlike terms cannot. It was also good to be able to refer back to the pocket example when needed to remind learners of like and unlike terms over the next couple of weeks. Very simple. But I wanted to draw your attention to two areas that complement Elizabeth's and Pat's words about collaborative and problem solving. And these are, again, general teaching methods, but one is the use of questioning. And I think we need to do more thinking about how much time we give learners to respond to questions. So if I say 3 times 4, so what's the answer? So how would we do that? 4 times, so I've given you no time to think about it at all. You can't bring your own strategy to that at all. There is some research which I'm trying desperately to find, and if anybody knows of it, please let me know, that suggested that tutors of maths in secondary school give learners no more than 0.8 seconds to reply. So, are we asking different types of questions to encourage different levels of learning? That's another question that's coming out. And then there's this idea of the use of context, and this is something that Pat referred to earlier when you said, do we worry too much about fitting it within a context? And I'd like to think more about whether contexts, must they always be real, or is it enough that they are meaningful? And an example of this that came out of this work was the Snooker Example. It's possibly not very realistic that we would score a game of snooker using algebra if we were down at the pub. But to people who know snooker and play it, it's very meaningful and can make algebra real for them, but maybe not for somebody who isn't a snooker buff at all, can't keep track of all the colours. And of course, is something that's meaningful to me going to be meaningful to you? And does that matter? So I think we need to do a lot more thinking about some of these issues: problem solving, collaborative learning, the use of questioning, and how we use contexts. So what's coming next? There will be a report on the project's findings that will report on the project as a process and on its outputs. There's going to be tons of teaching ideas and strategies, and what I think would be a sensible thing to do would be to augment the glossary or catalogue that's at the back of this. That might have to happen electronically, but Tina and I are going to be doing some thinking about the best way to share the ideas and all that great learning in there. Tina and I are going to undertake a wider survey of the tutoring population about the impact of the case studies. So people who weren't necessarily involved in this project, telling us, is this a useful kind of resource for NALA to be putting out there? And if so, what makes it useful? Is the glossary the thing that makes it useful? What else would help your practice? But then something that seems inescapable to my view, as we've been talking with the practitioners, the energy and the excitement and the talking, the amount of talking at these meetings was just fantastic. It wasn't just me, I promise. But we had 4.5 hours to fill each time, and I always panic that, gosh, what if it dries up? Well, it didn't dry up, and we could have been there till about 7 o'clock at night or the next morning. So this to me was an emerging network of practitioners who were getting excited, not because of the structure that we were putting in place, but because they were talking to other tutors in depth about topics and problems that their learners had. But what those tutors did in planning the workshop is came up with 4 sides of top tips, which are in your folder. And they created these tips by emailing around the other participants and saying, come on guys, what are your top tips? And they put this together. And I think this is just a fantastic resource. This is a product of tutors networking and sharing ideas. So there will be some exploration about whether there is value in having tutors networking on an ongoing basis. Again, I encourage you, if you haven't read them, to read the case studies. They're very interesting, hopefully readable, but that glossary at the back is where the real meat of it is. And that's it.